if somebody does have their genetic insights report, how easy is it to understand the information that has come through on the report?
That's a good question. I mean, we try and make it as easy as possible. So no matter what topic you're interested in, so let's say you're interested in, what we talked about a lot, do I have an underactive thyroid, right? You just find it in the list of reports, you click the download button, and you end up with this report. So when you get that, you open it. You can open it on any device. It's just a PDF. It's nothing special. And then, you got the cover. The first 2 pages after that, pages 2 and 3, are me introducing the subject, just to remind you of the stuff that we talked about in the first episode, about how all this stuff works, very brief overview. And then page 5 to 8 are, again, just covering what we've learned, really mainly in the previous episode, like how it actually works. So those first usually 8 pages are the same in every single report. Once you've seen one, you kind of have seen them all. Why do we put them in every report? First of all, because we don't know which one you're going to read first. So we want it there no matter what you're going to go for. Second of all, we encourage you to share your reports with others. And so again, when someone else sees the report for the first time, we want them to understand what they're looking at. So that's why we have the intro always there. However, if you've seen the intro, you thoroughly, absorbed it and understood it, in general, you can skip straight ahead to page 9. And so this is the first don't miss page. And this basically gives the risk score. And if applicable, which it usually is, the top 5 recommendations. There's no detail. It's just, here's the risk, here's your recommendations. It's the most brief overview possible, right? And so, we do it that way because if, say, you have an average risk and you're already doing all the recommendations, you don't need to read any further, right? You're done. But let's say, you're interested because you've got a high risk, or maybe it's not a risk, maybe it's a type, like we talked about the carbohydrate types, right? So I'm someone who is, a high type or a low type or whatever. Then you can continue. And so the next couple of pages gives more detail. This is what the report's actually about. What is a thyroid? What does it mean if it's underactive? Just, again, we don't assume that you have any of this knowledge and understanding already. We give you an overview. There's lots of links to scientific papers for that. And then usually, and we're getting better and better at this, we'll actually list the SNPs. So we talked last episode about what the SNPs are. So we've just made the assertion that this is your risk and these are your recommendations. We don't just say because we said so. Well, usually we say because you have these SNPs, right? So there are all these SNPs. So these are the sections of the gene that we're looking at, and then we'll say, and this is the variant you have. So most people have CC in this spot. You have CT. That is a variant, and that means this or whatever. If you have no idea what I just said, no interest, no problem. You can absolutely skip over that. You do not need to understand it at all to help yourself or to be fully informed even. It's only there for those people who don't want to take it on face value, who want to do the research themselves. Then you can look up every SNP, you can look up every variation, you can find out all about it if you want to. But that's nowhere near required. That's just if you want. But you can happily skip that as well if you want. Now the next section is really the most important in many cases, and that's the recommendations. So the recommendations can be very simple. Sometimes there's only one, and sometimes there's none even. If it's like a trait that we occasionally have in there that is just the way it is, and there's no scientific evidence that you can do anything about it, that doesn't always mean that there's nothing you can do about it. First of all, this is not too common, but I'm going to talk about the exceptions. So in the occasions where there's no recommendations, it's because there's not enough scientific evidence yet that any lifestyle or dietary or supplement changes will affect that. Doesn't mean that they won't, just means that the evidence isn't there yet. Our recommendations are only there if there is a sufficient amount of scientific evidence to put them there. If there is some evidence, there won't be a recommendation. There needs to be a lot of evidence for there to be a recommendation. As I said, we don't recommend drugs. when it comes to substances, we do tend to recommend supplements that are fairly common and well known, like magnesium and vitamin D3 and curcumin, and the ones that are well studied, because they have been well studied and therefore they've been studied with a lot of different genetic variants, that they actually do have an impact. And so, yeah, if there's no recommendations, it's just because there's not enough evidence yet. Usually there'll be at least one. So just for instance, with my lead report I talked about in the last episode, I have a tendency to break down lead very slowly. The one recommendation with that is don't be exposed to lead. Right? It's pretty simple. And I guess with the gluten intolerances, it's pretty similar, right? If you might have a gluten intolerance, then maybe don't have gluten. So sometimes it's as simple as that. Often there's more to it, right? So for instance, if you do, we talked about the weight loss one, then exercise is probably going to feature there somewhere. Eating a certain type of diet is going to feature somewhere, although often that's not the same. Like different people have different recommendations in that regard. Maybe certain vitamins and certain herbs to be recommended there. Obviously, lowering caloric intake to some degree is going to be recommended there. These are all going to be mainstream recommendations. So everything has to be backed up by loads of science. So my opinion would be someone needs to focus more on speeding up their metabolism, but that is not the mainstream scientific perspective. So that's not going to be on the list. Again, the list of recommendations is 100% above board, approved by all the government agencies that are breathing down the necks of anyone that they don't like. They're 100% kosher, whatever the word might be. So now what does vary is the order that they're in, so for one person, assuming there's more than one. So for one person, one recommendation may be at the top of their list. For another person, likely a different recommendation will be at the top of the list. You asked me about how to read the report. So literally it'll just say, here's what it is. Here's what it could do. Here's a link to, or links to studies that show that it can help with this. And here's like suggested action. And all that's within a few sentences. We try and keep it as simple as possible. We don't do any kind of advertising within that at all, right? We don't recommend our products. If a product is recommended, which it certainly is not, probably more than half the time, but if it is, you can go and get that wherever you want. Obviously, we appreciate it if you get it from us, but if it's easier for you to ship it, in the country you're in from somewhere local, or get it down the road, or whatever you want to do, totally fine. As long as it's good quality, that's totally up to you. So you go through the recommendations. As I say, sometimes there's one, sometimes there's 20-ish. It really depends. But if there is a lot of them, we do not recommend people try and do them all at once. And this is when the order becomes more important. Most people get overwhelmed when they have too much to do.
I was going to say, yes, please speak to that, because otherwise some people are like, okay, I'm going to do it all, and they start and they just go. So if you could please go a little deeper on that part to help everybody that's listening, that'd be great.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's this thing called the law of 80-20. And so this is a really interesting law, probably not popular in the current climate, but current political climate, but it's basically the idea, let's make it completely free of any politics and say that generally in business, it's kind of acknowledged that 80% of the work you do gets 20% of the results, and 20% of the work you do gets 80% of the results. There's also an interesting thing in business that 20% of your customers will tend to bring 80% of your income, something like that. Sometimes it's actually more extreme skew than that. Sometimes it's like 5% of your customers will bring 80% of your income, something like that. It's like a crazy thing like that. If you think about it, I mean, it does depend on the nature of your job. If you're on an assembly line all day, like I used to be, this is not so true. If you're literally doing exactly the same movement every day, but most people in their jobs, like there is a period of their day, maybe half an hour, where they probably get more actual productive work done than the rest of the hours put together. So there's that kind of tendency. So anyway, that's the law of 80-20. It's called the Pareto principle. You can look it up if you'd like to. But the point is, this principle absolutely needs to be applied to your health endeavors. And so the reason why the ordering of the recommendations is so important, and the reason why the fact that we order it based on your unique genetics is so important, is because not only can you often not do everything, but you often there's no need to. You just need to do the most important things. So what I would do is just start with the first recommendation, the top recommendation, and ask yourself the question honestly, am I already doing this? If the answer is yes, give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself a high five. Well done, that's great. And then move on to the second one, right? As soon as you hit a recommendation that you're not already doing, then that's the one that you may want to start, right? Whatever it may be. Now, I say may want to start. You can always scroll down because, say, maybe you're not doing recommendation 2 and 3, but recommendation 2 is going to be really difficult for you for whatever reason, and recommendation 3 is going to be really easy. Maybe do 3, right? Use a little bit of common sense with that. But, and ditto, like if we ever recommend something that you know is not a good idea, then don't do it. Like, so general, like we don't know everything about you, you know, it's not a crystal ball. So, you know, if we recommend something to you, be like, oh, but last time I had that, an allergic reaction, don't have it, you know, like, unfortunately, you know, the one thing that we're not at the stage of being able to do yet is to put it all into one huge thing. And so, yes, another report may have said to you, you know, like, don't eat dairy, but there might be another report that says dairy is good for this condition. It's saying that dairy is good for that condition in general, and it's saying that the SNPs in you that cause that issue in you respond to dairy, but it doesn't say that you globally as a person respond well to dairy. You may have different SNPs that mean you have a lactose intolerance or a casein intolerance, right? So you do have to bear that in mind. So if it's not a good idea, don't do it, right? So I guess the first question is, am I already doing it? Second question is, do I know of any reason why this would not be a good idea? If you can answer yes, if you can answer no to both of those questions, then you can go in and go, maybe I should actually do it, right? And then just do 1 or 2 is probably what I'd recommend. Now, this varies a little bit. If like one report you've identified, this is my issue, this is my big thing, like my friend with the underactive thyroid, maybe you do the top 3 or the top 5, right? I'll leave that up to you. But if it's just one of, you know, maybe a dozen reports that you've identified that are areas you want to work on, probably just do 1, you know, if that, just start with 1. And go from there. Now, the other thing is you may see commonalities, and this is a really good clue. So I see this over and over again when I go through it with people. So I just use eat dairy as an example. Like I went through the reports with someone well known, and will not share anything personal. The only thing that I'll say is what was interesting to me is that the recommendation eat dairy came up several times. Now, that's not that common. It's not the first time I've seen that recommendation, but it's definitely the first time I've seen it come up several times with the reports that someone had issue with. And there was no indications that it was a bad thing for them. I checked that as well. And I asked them, does dairy agree with you? They said, yeah. They said, I don't eat it, but because, you know, some guru told me it's not good for me. But yeah, I've never had an issue with it. It's never caused mucus or, you know, anything. I'm like, well, it seems to be indicating it for you, right? So the fact that it says, and then they were having like this, you know, plant-based milk, almond milk or whatever. And I was like, yeah, the amount of chemicals and stuff in those things, like if you have a dairy allergy, then you are better off with the chemicals because as I said, anything that you have an allergy or intolerance to, your body's acting like it's a poison anyway. But if you don't, if your body's totally fine with it, you might be better off just having milk than having almond milk, you know, as long as there's not some ethical reason not to, at least, which it wasn't in their case. So, you know, patterns. You might see vitamin D3 recommended over and over again. I've seen that a few times. Or iron. Maybe that happened with you, Chrissy. I can't quite remember. It's been quite a while now. But I think iron came up for you like many, many times.
Yeah.
And so we go, okay. So that's another way to read them and prioritize them. You could do a little, you know, just write the recommendations down that you think you want to follow. And then, you know, every time you have the same thing again, you can like put a tick next to it or something. And then maybe you could just start with the things that have the most ticks next to it. It's like, oh, well, that's been recommended 5 times. That's been recommended 3 times. I'll just do those to start with, you know? And that's a much, much smarter way of doing it in my mind than doing it randomly. And of course, that's what we try and facilitate. Now, if that still sounds complicated, as I said, you can just do one thing at a time. That's one way of doing it. So you can just go, you know what, for this month, this week, whatever feels manageable, I'm just going to focus on this one report, and I'm just going to do the top 1, 2, 3 recommendations or whatever. You can make it as simple as that, right? That's totally fine. You're still making progress that way. You might think, oh, that's not enough progress, so and I'm highly motivated. But here's the thing. You make more progress doing just one step going in the right direction than you make doing 50 steps going in the wrong direction. This is what most people are doing most of the time in my experience. Because I tend to work with quite highly motivated people, either because they're highly motivated in general, these successful people, or because they're highly motivated because they're really suffering, one or the other. And so, I tend to work with people who are already doing a lot. And I find that the issue, they think that they're not doing enough. And the issue is usually that they're doing the wrong thing. So it's much better to do something that has a lot of evidence that it's going to be a good idea than just because someone told me to, or because it felt right at the time, or, because unfortunately feelings change, right? Depending on a lot of different factors. And a lot of people are very adept at manipulating feelings, right? Like making you feel certain things. Anyone who's ever attended a health summit, right? You listen to 30 often very highly charismatic speakers and experts, and you listen to this one and they're like, wow, yeah, that's really convincing. I should try that. And then you listen to the next one and they're like, oh yeah, that's also really convincing. I should not do that. I should do the complete opposite. So it's like it's very easy to be swayed by this stuff if you're actually into it. And ditto if you're not into it, if this is all, oh God, I don't care about any of this, I just want to be well, then it's very easy to just go, anyone who sounds authoritative and confident enough to just go over what they think, because you don't know. So, if they sound like they do, I'll just go along with them. But it's so worthwhile it's so helpful to do. And honestly, I sometimes get this wrong. Like I speak to clients, I give them several recommendations, and a lot of the time they don't do them. Like most of the examples I gave, the person only did 1 or 2 things, I think, everything I've said. And yet that's all they actually needed to do to feel massively better. Now, would they feel better if they did the 3 or 4 other things that I also recommended? Probably. But it's that 80-20 thing again, right? Like just doing those 1 or 2 things was enough for them. They're feeling so much better. They're fine. They're happy with that. So that's a choice. That's a question of what you want to prioritize. Hey, hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below and make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.